The question that has been baffling historians for decades is whether or not Andrew Jackson was a good president. Does all the good he did outweigh all the bad? When it comes to Jackson, I feel like it's so tricky. I mean, he was this huge war hero, winning a battle for the US in New Orleans. He's also known for founding the Democratic Party and preserving individual liberties. Yet, there's so much bad that you don't hear about. The Trail of Tears, his abuse of power. Let's start off with Jackson's campaign. Jackson was known for being poor, and he had to work to become the man he was. He influences the idea of the self-made man. Jackson viewed Congress as aristocratic, and only he could actually relate and help the US people. After defeating the bank, he stated that it was the people's mandate to decentralize the bank. Jackson also felt that voting was restricted only to the wealthy and expanded male suffrage to all white men. He attempted to get rid of the Electoral College as it defers the popular vote, and also attempted to get rid of the federal government's power by getting rid of John Quincy Adams' American System, which put the power of infrastructure and tariffs in the hand of the federal government. With Jackson as president, he made it that the states controlled their own infrastructure. Because Jackson believed so strongly in individual equality, he believed that he was a fair and just president. However, he is known for his abuse of power.
In the past, other presidents had just used the veto if a bill seemed unconstitutional, but Jackson used it for bills he was against. Jackson thought that the executive branch should be the strongest of the three branches in government because its job was to execute the laws of the U.S. In Worcester v. Georgia, the federal government had to remove people from trespassing on Indian grounds. Jackson says no and signs Indian Removal Act, which expanded the amount of power which the president had because he didn't have to pass a law. When South Carolina attempted to nullify the federal tariff, Jackson sent in an army, which forced the hand of Henry Clay to come up with a compromise of 1833.
Another thing that Andrew Jackson is known for is his use of tariffs. South Carolina became angry and declared that the tariff acts, mainly the abominable tariff, were not authorized by the Constitution, meaning that the states legally did not have to follow it. In South Carolina's Ordinance of Nullification, they made it clear that they would secede from the United States if the government tried to use military force to make them comply. Jackson responded with the Force Act, which allowed military force to be used on any state that resisted the tariffs. Finally, in the Compromise Tariff of 1833, tariffs were lowered back to their original price, but only after causing a ruckus throughout America. Jackson's tariffs caused controversy in America, the delegates even remarking that the separation of South Carolina would inevitably produce a great dissolution of the Union. Another one of Jackson's failures was his foreign policy. His foreign policy appeared on the outside to be successful, but if you look deeper in, you will realize that most of it was a failure.
Andrew Jackson dedicated lots of time and effort into foreign affairs. Almost 1/3 of his annual messages involved foreign policy. During the spring of 1836, he reached a successful settlement of the argument that the French had with spoliation claims from the Napoleonic era. When he first came into office, Van Buren, his vice president, said negotiations with the French were hopeless, but Jackson did reach a treaty. But the French declined it because they did not have the money to implement it. He also reached the settlement of spoliation claims against Denmark, Portugal, and Spain, and trade agreements with Russia, Spain, Turkey, Great Britain, and Siam. The treaty with Great Britain reopened American trade with the British West Indies, while the agreement with Siam was the first between the United States and an Asian nation. Due to these diplomatic initiatives, American exports increased more than 75% and imports grew 250% during Jackson's presidency. However, missions to China and Japan accomplished nothing, and efforts to dislodge Great Britain's position in South America failed. Jackson's attempt to acquire Texas fell short. For years, he had considered Texas essential to the security of the Southwest, and as president, he was willing to spend $5 million to purchase it.
I think one thing that Jackson is really known for is his infamous spoils system.
President Andrew Jackson implemented the spoils system during his presidency. This led to corruption in government. The spoils system was when a president got elected and appointed their friends into office. He replaced many government positions, almost 10%, with inexperienced supporters and friends. Many of the people in office positions had little to no experience and could not do their job effectively. Jackson believed that having a strong political network outweighed having qualified people in those positions. The people appointed by Jackson caused the quality of such positions to deteriorate, such as the postal office. The smooth flow of the American government was interrupted by the spoils system.
Jackson did have a strange relationship with his cabinet, heavily rotating through cabinet members and having little control over them. He relied instead on his kitchen cabinet or a close group of advisors outside of the cabinet. They provided counsel to the president, who rarely went to his cabinet. They acted as the close advisors to the president rather than the cabinet. So it seems that Jackson wasn't really the man of equality that he said he was. Along with the spoils system, he also had his bank policy. Jackson strongly disliked the Second National Bank, and in 1832, he vetoed a bill that called for the renewal of the National Bank. When renewal became possible due to a charter, Jackson attempted to weaken the economic power of the bank. Jackson disliked the bank because it was part of John Quincy Adams' American Whig system, and Jackson was a Democrat and thought the states should have ultimate power and disliked the federal government. To Jackson, the bank represented the upper privileged class, and since he was a man of the people, he disliked the bank. Jackson's elimination of the National Bank caused major recessions, such as the crisis of 1837 and 1839. In the 1830s, Jackson started what was called the Trail of Tears, the forced relocation of approximately 60,000 Native Americans in the United States.
As president, Jackson continued his campaigns against the Native peoples. In 1830, he signed the Indian Removal Act, which led to Native peoples losing their land and that land being given to the cotton empires of the East. Jackson stated that the emigration should be voluntary, but if the natives remained where they were in America, they must be subject to the state's laws.
I think that overall, the Trail of Tears was the most despicable part of Jackson's presidency.
Andrew Jackson's stance towards Native Americans remained fairly stagnant and brutal throughout his entire presidency. His policy was either get out or follow the rules of America and stay. He inflicted harsh forms of relocation, such as the Trail of Tears, in which thousands of Native Americans lost their lives to brutal and inhumane conditions.
While Jackson did accomplish many great feats in his presidency, it is clear that the bad that he did, the Trail of Tears, the spoils system, and his bank policy, outweigh the good completely.